I was reading Never Let You Go by Kazuo Ishiguro last night, and I finished the first two parts of the book and hold me back because the urge to throw hands at truth is insanely high. Like, for the love of all that is good in this world, lock this girl up and send her far, far away from my conscious awareness of her character's existence. Anyhow, as I was finishing this last chapter of part two and about to go to sleep, my eyes fell upon another one of Miss Girl's horrendous lines, and I physically gasped at the disrespect. When I put the book down and went to bed, though, I couldn't help but correlate it to a conversation I had overheard of some boys in my class. And before you hurt your knees from trying to be the fastest to jump to conclusions, I wasn't exactly eavesdropping or anything. In fact, they were talking quite loudly with awareness of everyone else sitting in the classroom and making the conversation public without any obvious signs of disapprovals of that fact. So, to get to the point, their conversation had been about normal things, and one thing led to the other, and before you knew it, they were talking about alimony. One of them started it by saying that he's scared of girls because girls can very easily frame him for domestic violence after getting married, and then not only would he be tortured by the police, he would also lose half of all he owns to his now ex-wife. A few seconds of silence to let it sink in that that's a 17-year-old teenage boy who is neither in a relationship nor is confident or comfortable with talking to most women, so it is certainly not the brightest idea to suspect himself of suffering that specific problem. But sure, let's indulge into it for the sake of argument, which from his point of view was that alimony is bad, and he was much too insistent about it for there to be any confusion. I fail to see the point in his argument, though, because even if I acknowledge the malpractice of the law to benefit not quite good interests, which is unfortunate, it is a considerably low amount compared to the actual cases. I do agree the malpractice is unfortunate, but alimony is not bad as a result, especially coming from the mouth of a boy who preaches superiority of a homemaker wife. That is, he wishes for his counterpart to financially depend on him. It doesn't make sense that he is mad because she is financially dependent on him. Not to mention, alimony is not a gender specific aid. It's in principle an attempt to rightfully distribute the assets owned during the marriage. But it doesn't stop there. Then he suggests that harsh treatment of accused in the cases of domestic violence or harassment is also wrong because of false cases, which he is almost paranoid that it will happen to him. Again, the proportion of false cases is considerably less, and since they are the rarity, that is why they get reported more, whereas the actual cases are almost a norm and therefore not talked about enough. So, in an attempt to safeguard the few falsely accused, he's okay with risking to give no repercussions to actual perpetrators of harassment and domestic violence. But hold on, it gets worse. To this, one of the guys had added that he himself would have treated an accused in the case of harassment and domestic violence harshly because he wouldn't be aware of the accused being guilty or not, but the principle of the matter being the crime would obviously make him feel angry. So then another guy quite calmly added that there is nothing wrong with domestic violence and that there is no reason to overreact so much about it. Put that boy on the watch list right now, I swear. He continued by saying that our predecessors used to beat up their wives, so they should be able to too. Another guy countered by saying that just because it was done in the past doesn't mean that it is the correct way. To which the boy replied with such sheer confidence that of course it was correct because it was in the past, like how people in the past were correct about having only one relationship or marriage, which false information, but we will come back to it later. He said that if your wife has slept with three men, then you obviously have the right to hit her, and then proceeded to make arguments along the same line, but much more disrespectfully using obscene words and crude terminology. Oh, and just to be clear, he does not mean that in the sense of infidelity, but more so an encapsulation of the woman's entire life, while also simultaneously suggesting that there is no reason for the male counterpart to be held to similar expectations. And not to say that you have no right to certain boundaries and expectations with your partner, but you certainly don't have the right to expect every single person on earth to follow the same. I mean, that dude said that whichever woman has a body count of more than two, she is basically, well, a comfort woman, to put it lightly. That's a rather disturbing thing to say because people really are dissociating the act from love itself, and that is basically the form of being the closest to one another, almost like a binding of the bodies, the same way love is the binding of souls. And people can fall in love more than one time in their lives because it doesn't always work out, and they have no obligations to keep themselves in an unhappy situation, and therefore it has no correlation with that sort of job at all. In fact, it's a bit sickening how he is just able to assume that women in those positions perform those acts for their own pleasure, when it is known that most of them end up as such due to one unfortunate reason or another. Many of them are taken without their wills. So he has no right to so blatantly disrespect both set of parties that he vaguely attacked, and although no one came with the latter defense, some boys did try to drive the first point through him, but he wouldn't budge. It seems awfully hypocritical, given the fact that one of his very close friends, who is a guy that, in his eyes, is very much deserving of respect, is dating three girls at the same time. Yeah, let that sink in. What's more undigestible is the fact that if I had to recall such conversations with the boys in my school, this would nowhere be near the worst categories. Sometimes I physically have to remove myself from being within earshot because it would genuinely make me scream, cry, and throw up if I had to hear another second of it. Like this one time, the teacher for our period wasn't present, so me and three other girls were sitting in our class, talking and studying, not really creating much disturbance for the nearby classes. But the boys from the class just adjacent to ours decided to come there. Not all of them, of course, but a substantial amount, and not the sort of company we would appreciate. They had been bunking their English period because the principal herself decided to teach it, and in their frustration decided talking about her body and speculating about her relationship with her husband disgustingly would be the perfect pastime. I can't even bring myself to reiterate their words exactly, but I was on the verge of tears even when they weren't even talking about me. So I asked one of the girls sitting beside me if she wanted to accompany me to the library because I was getting increasingly uncomfortable, and she agreed, so we left. And I don't know why, but two of those guys decided to come to the library and sit beside us as well. I kept quiet, trying to ignore them, and I suppose the other girl was able to tell I wasn't feeling very great about this arrangement, so she tried to keep them from talking to me, and although one of them didn't say much and only glanced every once in a while, the other guy kept trying to talk to me. He didn't say anything on the same wavelength as his talk back in the classroom. In fact, his words were perfectly civil, excluding a few attempts to compliment here and there, which could be left for interpretation. But it's just this nauseating vibe I could get from him. Perhaps because of his earlier ordeal that it felt violating to even have a conversation with him at that moment. The assistant librarian, yes, we have an assistant librarian. Actually, two assistant librarians, but that's besides the point. Came over to try and make him go sit somewhere else, not really because he had picked up on any tension or uncomfortability, but because the guy was trying to talk insistently and therefore creating enough noise to disturb the library. But instead of listening, he argued with him disrespectfully and then brushed him off as if he isn't older than him, and then proceeded to mock the librarian's accent. Since he was holding conversation in my direct vicinity and actively trying to talk to me, I spoke up this time, albeit hesitantly, and said that I don't really find that accent to be annoying, to which he calmed down and just shrugged, saying that he personally just isn't fond of those people, which wild way to say it, but I added that I actually know a bit of people from that region and don't think there is any actual basis with which you can just so widely club them together as a sort of alien species, which they are not because they are humans just like us. But then the bell rang and I got up and left as soon as it did. That particular boy so often makes such offensive and downright distasteful statements on a whim that it's a wonder how he was able to be a part of our student council. But I suppose it shouldn't be that surprising when one of the top appointees of the student council this year circulated non consensual videos and pictures of girls junior to us that he had acquired, but since we didn't have the actual evidence, that is, the videos and pictures, we could never report it. Still, our school is adamant over the fact that if the dress code is more and more conservative, then schools will be more and more safer for their female students and faculty. They banned our teachers from wearing sleeveless blouses in peak summer, and they forbade us from wearing our hair open regardless how wet it is, because it is somehow distracting. When we were around 14 or 15 back in 10th grade, we had gone to ask our teacher about the reason why they were making the dress code more and more ridiculous, to which we received the reply that it is for our own safety in school. But do tell what good is an institution that is made in principle to help us learn to think for ourselves, but never teaches or checks on the harmful mindsets of any potential perpetrators, and rather only enforces further restrictions on the group they deem to be vulnerable to becoming victims. It's also the fact that they can never fathom to actually speak it, because they themselves don't agree with it but still continue to act that way. My own class teacher or homeroom teacher is what that title is the equivalent of, is so infuriating about matters like these sometimes. Imagine a teacher who refuses to teach junior students her subject if they don't pick it in their higher classes because she deems it superior, who often makes uncalled for personal remarks about a student's personal life or appearance in between her class, and who mocks students who perform poorly in her tests, specifically female students, that they shouldn't have taken that subject and are only good for being married off, nothing else. In fact, once during our practical examinations, which are basically tests for our laboratory experiments in which we have to make a separate file to record all the work we do there, she said while checking mine that it looks like it was made by a boy. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't understand what implication one is supposed to make by that comment. And if I am supposed to understand it as being bad, which it wasn't because the work was complete and comprehensively so, even my writing was intelligible, then it makes it all the more confusing because why do you assume that a file made by a boy would obviously be bad? I am a strong supporter of freedom of speech and expression, but if that includes one's right to state whatever that comes in their mind as an opinion, then it also includes my right to have an opinion on your opinion. And my opinion is that this type of behavior is not only unprofessional but disheartening to see in a person which you expect to learn from. Not only do they fail to teach their particular subjects, they also fail to keep the all encompassing objective of giving a child an education. That's why I have almost no motivation to go to school anymore. Haven't had much for a long time. And I just can't wait for it to be over.